Han Solo wins the fastest hunk of a junk in the galaxy. Describe this back scene and the emotions that you went through reading it.
I was happy that he got the Falcon so early in the book, because that meant he had a lot of the book to use the Falcon.
Back in Nar Shaddaa, Han reunites with Bria Theron.
No, there's never going to be anything else for them. And so when she goes in...
Hey guys, welcome to Star Wars Timeline. Today, John and I are back, and we're finishing our grand finale. We're going to talk about the entire A.C. Crispin's Han Solo Trilogy, finishing first with the third book, Rebel Dawn. We will discuss the characters, the storyline. Guys, this podcast is excellent for Star Wars newcomers. If you don't know where to pick up your first book, this trilogy will be an excellent entry point. I'm pretty sure John will testify. And afterwards, we will also talk about the comparison between the books and the movie. We'll discuss the trilogy's strengths and its weaknesses, what we personally liked. Anyway, John, I'm so happy to have you back. This was pretty awesome set of conversations we had. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I really like this book, so I'm glad to talk about it.
Yeah, I think we hesitated just a little bit. We were discussing how we're going to film the second podcast, which is going to be, by the time fans see this recording, they'll probably already have their hands on the second one. And I thought it would be quite valuable for us to concentrate on things we both enjoy and we don't, which is perfectly fine. I think it adds to the discourse, and I think it kind of dodges that very, very cliche, always being happy, always praising everything for no good reason. Sometimes it's good to criticize work and hear from other fans that may disagree with us. It sort of alters your perception, gives you a wider breadth of opinions out there. Anyway, John, before we take off, a little preface. Where we left off with the book number 2. We ended up on a rousing climatic battle, right? The smugglers win the day against the Empire. They're defending their homeland of Nar Shaddaa. They're doing the Hutt's bidding on one end, on the other end defending their own place, right? And Han Solo is back to his smuggler lifestyle days. He enjoys that. And he is intrigued by the upcoming Sabacc tournament on Bespin, which is good old Lando Calrissian friend has mentioned, and he decides to participate. Before diving into this final third book, let's discuss Andrew Struzan's final cover for the Rebel Dawn. We see an older, more confident-looking posture, right? He's like imposing figure. He's in front of the page. There we go, guys. Have a look there. I wanted to talk about the evolution of the illustrations portraying Han from the first book to the third one. What are your comments on that?
Well, I like all three cover illustrations. They're each nice. It's funny that the first and thirds are more favorites, and ironically, those books are also my favorites. The third book feels the most classically Star Wars. It has the three characters we recognize. It has the Star Destroyers in the background. It has the stars in the background. Like, this looks like a classic Star Wars cover. And Paradise Snare does have some elements of Star Wars in it, but the coloration doesn't feel necessarily classic Star Wars in the same way. And with the Hutt Gambit, this one actually makes me think of Empire a little bit, but still, it doesn't. It feels a little bit off the way the sky is designed. There's still good paintings and really nice artwork, but when you compare it to the third, this one's the one that just automatically you think, okay, this one's the best. And maybe because it's the closest to what a movie poster would be. Like if the movie Solo had been made in the 1980s as like a prequel to the movies, this is what the movie poster would look like. It just may have been a little less stylized.
Yeah, I think that's a signature of Drew Struzan's style. All of his artwork seems to go in that poster-like direction. I mean, look at all of the things in promo art he has done outside of the poster work, right? For multiple different franchises that he has done over the years. And he has that larger-than-life kind of feel to it. And I really enjoyed the points that you made in regards to previous covers to this trilogy, because it seems like he is trying to represent or illustrate the plot lines in each one. And he sort of changes his storytelling based on how he uses composition. From the first book, obviously in regards to the character himself, he had to de-age Han Solo, right? Harrison Ford, and to show us that the other major players involved there. And then in the second book, there's sort of like a hyper focus. You mentioned something like Empire Strikes Back, right? There's a hyper focus on his face. And in the third book, again, he wanted to message with this very confident, cocky posture that it's now the Han that we recognize in the films will be born out of this particular book. Yeah. But how would you say his the artist's aesthetics different from modern Star Wars books? And do you have any favorites from the new books?
Certainly, I have some favorites. And not just in Star Wars, but in general, book cover design has changed. The importance of a full painting is not there anymore as much, which is just kind of sad to me because I love full paintings. Although some books still do it. Modern books tend to go for a more realism, less stylized in some ways. If I can quickly point out a few that I particularly really enjoy.
Oh, absolutely. I'd love that. And guys, look at that collection. I cannot even begin to compete with John's setup there. I know you complimented mine with my little lights going in the back. Like, hold on a second. What is this book and that book? It's awesome, man. It's so exciting.
Well, thank you. This is one of my favorites, the Master and Apprentice cover by let me get the name. It is Alice X Zhang. I think it's a terrific cover. I really like it. This one, it feels like an older style cover because it's got that that kind of painting aspect to it. I also really like The Princess and the Scoundrel, and this feels a lot like the Drew Struzan design. His style of this could be a movie poster.
And I think almost. It was deliberate.
It was deliberate.
Like paying homage to the great artist.
And this one was done by Olivia Cuthbertson. And then one of the ones that I'll point out that's very different in style, but I still really like, is the cover of Catalyst. And this is a very minimalist. And the reason I like this is because at face value, it looks like the Death Star. And it's telling you, this book is about building the Death Star. But when you look really closely, you can see what looks like a little dot. And when you zoom in and really look at it, it's a Star Destroyer. And it shows the scale of the Death Star. And you see another Star Destroyer here in little ships, but it shows you the scale of the Death Star and just gives you the massive aspect to it. And so this isn't, quite as stylized as being like a painting. This isn't quite as intricately detailed in those ways, yet it still works really well as a cover. So this is proof that sometimes you don't need to have the incredible depth necessarily to a cover. If I was the person in charge of the cover design, I would make every book the painting style of these books or of the Han Solo books. But I am not that person, so that's not going to happen.
And that's why John will be invited over and over and over to my podcast because, yes, I agree. I'm a happy seal clapping at your last comment there. But another proof that John and I are probably brothers separated at birth is I literally have in my prompt The Master and Apprentice as my first example of my favorite books because I remember the time when the marketing for the Phantom Menace was in full swing before it came out. They had little featurettes on History Channel, George Lucas and the Power of Mythology, and showing you pictures that all over New York City you would see different styled posters of Phantom Menace, one of the Queen Padme, of different ones of the Drew Struzan's one, the black ones, and they were completely magnificent. And when I look at this Master and Apprentice, not only is the story itself is in a way returned to form, giving us two exemplary Jedi from the prequel era, but also the book harkens to that late 90s, early 2000s kind of feel. And I just felt like, wow, man, we're to that old school Art Deco art movement that the prequel movies try to de-age the technology in the films, and it represents that greatly. But another book that I really enjoyed, John, was the second alternative variant, I think, sold from Target, from the Rising Storm of the High Republic.
Yes.
When you see Bel Zadifar and other characters, I have nothing against the original cover. It's very cinematic in a way. But the second one, it's once again, I think what the High Republic was intentionally doing with its art direction, trying to represent the Art Deco, the golden age of the Jedi. Yeah. And I mean, that book is just the cover is so dramatic, so beautiful. And the final book, which I'm glad you brought a Death Star, because I understand exactly the point you're making there, that visual comparison of scale tells a story of itself, and for you figuring it out just as it's an added bonus. But sometimes, in some rare occasions, I do enjoy when just a character is superimposed on the cover when it suits the occasion. And for me, it's Tarkin. I wasn't the biggest, like if you have it close by, you want to pull it up, please, by all means. It's not my absolute favorite of the new books. It was an enjoyable read. But just seeing that very menacing visage, I think the likeness of Peter Cushing is very well done there. And just, it's not necessarily photographic. It's more like a Renaissance portrait. Mm-hmm. And he's just staring at you from that book cover. He's saying, you know, we're going to talk about the big guy here, the big deal, right? It's Tarkin. I thought it was excellently done.
Yeah. The Tarkin cover didn't work quite as well because I didn't quite enjoy the style of the way that they did the painting, and just it felt a little bland, making it it's the Empire. It kind of needs to be bland in some ways, but at the same time, I'm like you could do more with it. But still, I the point you're making about how it's selling you were reading a book about Tarkin. Tarkin's the main face on here. It's very simple, straightforward. So
and it sells the book, which is the illustrations points, right?
Yeah.
So guys, a little preface, diving into the third book, kind of like to situate ourselves, get the baseline for this final discussion. John, you invested time into 2 books already, right? There were some things that you've pointed out you liked, you disliked, but you kept on reading. What was your expectation for the final chapter?
Well, first, I had been promised this by people who had talked about it online, and also I just hoped that in the final book, I would get a lot of Bria. I wanted some more closure to her connection with Han, which we got. I wanted him with getting the Falcon, which we got. I wanted seeing Han get set up for where he is in the movies, which we got. And I wanted to see more of his connection with Lando and Chewie, which we got. So pretty much at every level, we got everything we needed in this book. And even some stuff I had no idea. There's 2 things in particular we'll talk about later. I had no idea I needed this, but as soon as I got it, I was like, yes, I am so happy to have those in the book. So this book, promised a decent amount. And it delivered on what it promised and even a little bit more, which is exactly what you want the book to do.
I think we're sort of stating the obvious, which a lot of fans will agree, that, generally in a trilogy of books or the movies, what you want to do at the end is tie up all the loose ends and give us a nice climatic ending. But my next question is slightly different. Before we get to that end, what are some of the choices or decisions that a filmmaker or a book writer could do to up the ante in the final book?
Well, the one thing that I think Crispin did that a lot of writers would want to do is the scale feels larger. It's not just Han trying to save one woman. It's not just a small Hutt clan fighting. This is a kind of more galactic scale. This is a bigger scale fight that is happening in Rebel Dawn. Han isn't just part of a little rebellion. He's part of a pretty decent sized rebellion with Corellia. And then also Han has when in a final story, you want there to be like a big boss, the final boss, as video game people would say. And this book finally has the showdown with the final boss, which is the priest that has been just, dogging poor Han ever since the first book. And so Crispin does handle everything. There's a few times where she'll twist something and you're like, ooh, I didn't expect that to come. But everything after you read it, you're like, that is a very logical conclusion. That is a very nice way to end it. It is a very that's the way the word. If I had to wrap up this whole book in one word, it would be satisfactory, because she's giving you what the book needs and what the audience wants.
Very interesting. The comparison I usually make when looking at it, whether it's a single film, a trilogy, or a trilogy of books, is it's my personal experience of listening to music as well, where you start off from a place that is very focused, well-defined, but not necessarily large in scale, and you work your way up from there. And that's what I think was very successfully accomplished in this trilogy, where I think it speaks to A.C. Crispin's tremendous talent of not just prose or structuring paragraphs or scenes or evolving from one scene to the next, but strategically understanding where I'm going to begin. What if I never get the chance to write book 2 or 3? And in case I do, I already have a plan how I'm going to up that ante and give the readers a satisfying grand finale. And we start off with a small, intimate relationship with Han. It's a pretty personal story there. There's not a lot of moving elements. We focus on him and his immediate surrounding, and it kind of grows from there. In book 2, we're introduced to the Hot Clans, we're introduced to this interplay of this underworld and other players, even the scene with Darth Vader, as we discussed, right? And at the end, now it's something larger than himself, and what's his role in it? And obviously, when we get to the films, he's not the only character in the trilogy or in the film, right? He's part of a larger cast. There's Luke, there's Leia, there's Obi-Wan Kenobi, and so forth. And it's such a reverence and understanding of the source material where Crispin is saying, whether it's through guidance from George Lucas or his comments that he directed and guided her path along the way, or whether she has accomplished it on herself, saying, that's exactly where I need to go. I'm going to build this chain, and all links in it will be so strong that you won't be able to deny it. Obviously, we have different take on book 2, you and I, but I think it's all fine.
Yeah, and one thing I'll just go ahead and say for this book is that this is the book that Han Solo feels the most like Han Solo. This is the absolute closest, I think, that he felt, not just in this trilogy, but in a lot of the Star Wars books. He just absolutely felt like Han here. And, in the first book, I compared him to Indiana Jones. And in the second book, I compared him to James Bond. And I was fully prepared and thinking in my head as I was reading, who am I going to compare him to this time? I didn't get one because it didn't feel like any other character from cinema or anything. It felt like Han. And I think that was a very good thing for the book because it shows, we talked about the character progression, that he's slowly becoming more and more like he becomes in the movie because he's going on that progression. And it's perfect for him. And again, in a lot of ways, the themes in this book feel like they were same themes that were dealt with in the movie Solo, which also I think is a good lead-in for A New Hope. And so I think that because the character feels so consistent, the plot works anyway. But it wouldn't have worked as well if Han had felt different still. If Han still felt like a different character from cinema, I would have been a little bit harsher on this book. But because he feels so much like Han, it's the right tone that was needed.
Yeah, and before starting on our story discussion, I would also add that it takes a tremendous skill to deconstruct, de-age the character, and take away attributes from him that every Star Wars fan will recognize, but still make him compelling and layered, right? Because I would make an argument that one of the nitpicks that I have about the Solo film is when we see Han in the beginning, he's like a clean slate. He's very rudimentary. He's very basic. There's not a lot of compelling texture to the character. He's like, oh, I'm a kid on the run. That they don't go deeply into like him struggling with his childhood. All that we know about him is he wants to get away for whatever reason, and we're supposed to take it at face value. And what I think makes him interesting is the story in the movie. But I think a little bit of preface where he was before would have added to it.
Well, we did get, in at least in literary form, we did get like a prequel book, Most Wanted, which I think was a pretty good look at Han and Kira before the movie. And I feel like if the movie had either been longer or if they had been able to make multiple films and spread it out and had a plan there, then they could have shown that journey more, which is essentially what the books are. I would argue that the movie is just the concepts of this trilogy smushed into one. You have Han escaping from a bad situation that is like at the beginning of the movie. And then he's meeting up with these ne'er-do-well, smuggling type groups and working with them. That's the middle of the movie. And then him kind of working with the rebellion, trying to figuring out he has to do the right thing for the right reasons. That's the end of the movie. And so these concepts match up perfectly. It's just here we have 1,000 pages and hours of reading to really unfold that and make a perfect character journey. Whereas in the movie, they did the whole thing in just
it's all
2
condensed,
hours.
Yeah. And I absolutely picked up on all of those beats, and I knew that writers like the Cash Dens, they did their homework. They're fans of these books, and I didn't frowned at the fact that they're not using the expanded universe, that they had to start off with a new mark, and I was totally fine with it. Anyway, guys, let's start discussing this particular book, right? The Rebel Dawn.
Yeah.
With a stroke of luck and cool calculation, Han Solo wins the fastest hunk of a junk in the galaxy, right? He gets the Millennium Falcon in a tense card duel. That's how I like to call it, with Lando Calrissian. His first order of business, obviously, is to beef up the ship, right? He upgrades it with the freighter with the latest technology suited for smuggling operations. Also, he makes a short detour to the Wookiee homeworld of Kashyyyk, where Chewie is married to Mala Tabak, his wife, right? His betrothed, or however Wookiees go about it. Describe the Sabak scene and the emotions that you went through reading it.
Well, I was happy that he got the Falcon so early in the book, because that meant he had a lot of the book to use the Falcon, and he hadn't had it in the previous books. It had been present, when Lando had it. So that was nice. And of course, it reminded me of the movie in some ways, him using cleverness to win it. And then with going to Kashyyyk, I thought that was fascinating, because Kashyyyk has always been a very difficult subject to write about. For instance, when Zahn wrote about Kashyyyk in the Thrawn trilogy, I think it worked out really well, but I know people who really did not like his portrayal of Kashyyyk, and it was like, how do you write the Wookiees as a people, and how do you write their culture right? And I know that there have been video games that have tried to be set on Kashyyyk that looked really cool, and then when you got to the story, it was like, it's a little weird story. So it's very difficult to handle Kashyyyk, and so Kashyyyk's not huge in this book. It's a decent amount of time, but I think that AC Crispin was able to handle it well. And it's interesting that poor Chewbacca is kind of torn, because he feels intensely that he has to keep this life debt to Han, but also Chewbacca also kind of wants to be able to have a life with his family, and so I just find that kind of interesting.
Zoom back a little bit to the specific scene where Han is facing off against Lando. What do you think the author was consciously doing with the characters, pitting them one against the other?
I don't think that she wanted either one to be too strong, and also you want to leave a little bit of doubt in the scene, and I think that Crispin did that. You figured, I think this is when Han's going to win the Falcon, but you weren't 100% confident. You were like, oh, maybe something bad will happen. Maybe this isn't the right scene. And so there was just the right amount of doubt. With also the exact amount of hope that the book needed to have. And so I think she balanced that real well.
Yeah, I compared this scene later when we got Casino Royale. That was my favorite part of the movie.
Okay. Yes,
it was so freaking tense and so well done. To me, it was better than all the amazing action in the film, because, oh my God, the way they're flipping the cards, the way that they grill each other, the poker face, the tension around the table. And with Han and Lando, I think what she wanted to give subtext to, not necessarily spell out. And that's what I love about reading literature in general. She gave a little subtext of the emerging bromance between Han and Lando. It's like they seem to be these two, let's say, smuggler / card play intellectuals, right? Because they are very good at it, both of them, at this point in their lives. But at the same time, it's without them fully realizing it, how they're similar, how their friendship will emerge from this. It was pretty fun to read. Was it worth anticipation, and did you feel the emotional reward when then comparing it to the film?
Yeah. I think both handle it well. I think at least in the film, it happened at the exact right time. It is at the very end of the film. It feels like that is the reward for all the hardship that he's gone through. Whereas here, it's in the if you view each book as an act, it's at the beginning of the third act as opposed to the end of the third act. So I could have been handled there instead. I'm not particularly sure. So maybe I'll give a little bit of an edge to the movie in that regard.
I understand perfectly what they were trying to do with Lando And I think in the long run, it works in the film, where they wanted to show that he is this suave dude on the surface, but inside he's just as conflicted as Han. He just has a better way of going about it. I appreciate it. It's a different, newish take on the character, but it made perfectly reasonable sense. But I wish that in the film they bolstered his cockiness a little bit more, because even when you meet them in Empire Strikes Back, and the way that Lando just goes in for the kill with Leia, I mean, extra 2 hours, man, he might have like won her over from Han. It's like he's such a ladies' man, that sexual charisma just like oozing from this character. They may be on the same level as smart guys and smugglers and confident in their own way, but Lando just feels more experienced. If I'm not mistaken, he is Billy D. Williams. He's senior he's older, right, as that actor, older than Harrison Ford in the film, and he just projects in the film. You could see that. So I wish that in the movie a little bit we got a couple of more scenes where sort of like Orlando fluffed his feathers a little bit, like, look at me and this little chump here, me and my Millennium Falcon. It would have worked, I think.
And even here, when Lando loses the Falcon, it didn't seem like he had lost everything. He still kind of keeps an air of, oh well, I still got more. I mean, of course, he still loves the ship, but this isn't like devastating to him. Whereas if Han loses the Falcon, it's devastating.
Yeah, I would add to that when I was reading into it, there was something that the author was not telling us, where I felt that inside his ego was wounded, man. He was like,
yes,
oh, damn it, I have to give the ship up. Well, maybe kind of I'll try to keep my eyeballs on the ship still. Maybe befriend this little guy. I can't completely let go Falcon. That's the love of my life as well. Moving on with the plot, back in Nar Shaddaa, Han reunites with Bria Theron, his ex-lover. And he finds out that she's now in full swing with the Rebel Alliance. And they plan a major offensive on the Ulysses slave colonies that we learned about in the previous books. But Han is sort of being Han that he's reluctant. Sounds familiar, guys?
Yep.
We'll get to it. And the Alliance offers him a sizable compensation. He's like, okay, all right, I'll take the mission. However, after the battle, his former lover and her troops, the good guys, they turn their blasters right on the smugglers and, of course, Han, and they confiscate all the valuables for the rebel cause, right? It's gone.
Yeah.
Han Solo is furious. He threatens to kill Bria if they ever meet again. And branded as a traitor on Nar Shaddaa, Lando questions Han's involvement in this whole thing. And he would decks Han in the jaw, right, at one point.
I think it's interesting that, for Han, there's still the potential that he could have gotten back with Bria. Like, he's thinking, maybe if I do this job, maybe if I help her with this battle in the rebellion, if I help out with this, maybe there's a chance we can get back together. So he had that kind of optimism that there was a future for them. Yeah. Whereas Bria seems pretty confident. No, there's never going to be anything else for them. And so when she goes in for the, take the stuff from them, and it happens again later in the book when they're going to confiscate the priest's valuables, and the rebellion takes everything. Bria is basically like, I mean, we need the empire, or the rebellion needs it to stop the empire, and it doesn't seem to phase her as much hurting Han like that. And so it shows that she's pretty much moved on. I mean, she still appreciates him and may have had feelings, but she's at least moved on. And it recognizes that nothing's going to happen, whereas Han never really got that.
Yeah, I think what both this book, this particular scene you described, and the movie illustrate very well is the difference between men and women's differences in how we mature emotionally and then, spiritually. And it's no detriment to Han Solo's character at all, because he's all heart. Even in this third book, he's all heart. And his heart is going to be broken again and again. And generally what we guys are. And I don't want to put everybody under the same umbrella. We all go through a different experience in life. But in general, when you encounter your first sweet love, it's generally, especially in high school, my personal experience was girls, when it doesn't work out, girls are the ones to move forward fast because they are practical. Because that's how their mentality is built a lot around biology. And it makes total sense. Again, we're not talking about who's better. It's nothing to do with that, guys. That's not the direction of the conversation we're going in. I have to spell it out. What I'm saying is that difference. And Bria, just like Akira in the film, she's like, Han, what was between us, it's good. And, she was in a way very open and direct with Han, Kira, in the film. But she's like, it's over. Let it go. And he's bitter, he's hurt, he's a little bit resentful. There's nothing toxic about it. It's difficult to move on. The person that you loved, and it's no fault of their own, either Kira or Bria. They're just, their paths with completely different routes, and that's the reality of it. And she was the one who picked herself up quicker, and she's like, I'm with the rebellion. Han, I don't have time for this nonsense. Let's go. Give me the valuables.
Right. Yeah.
So the next question I have is, was the Rebel Alliance justifying doing what they did?
Generally, yes. Part of the problem is that the idea of the Rebel Alliance is that they were generally fighting for more individual rights and freedoms, whereas the Empire was all about collectivism and the government having the power. And so when they basically said, no individuals are going to get this stuff, we're collecting this for the rebellion, it kind of left a little bit of an idea of, wait a second, maybe the rebellion's not going to be that much better than the Empire. Makes you think, wait a second, are they doing, now that they have had victories, now they're slowly turning into the thing that they're fighting against, which is something that shows like Andor and Rogue One did a great job demonstrating. And I liked that about this, is that, generally we still agree the rebellion's good and it's the right thing to stop against the Empire, but it makes you think, how much better is it really? And so I just thought that was an interesting concept.
On one hand, you have this moral judgment where, like, guys, you're all thieves. Come on. Honest work. Give me a break here. We need this because we're fighting for the future of the galaxy, right? Yeah. It's in a way, it's just a selfless act, right? They're not buying blink with this stuff. They need a rebellion to win. They're practical about this. On the other hand, man, I felt like I'm standing behind Han's shoulder. I'm like one of his buddy smugglers. I'm like, really? You're gonna do me dirty like this? Like, are you serious? Well, like, we helped you out. You scored your victory, right? What's going on here? I felt physically upset, man.
Yeah, I felt bad for Han, but at the same time, I was like, I can see Bria's side on this.
Like, come on. Your rewards, really, honestly. Lando's reaction to the news. What led to that physical exchange between the two? What did he make of it?
Which exchange are you referring to?
There's a scene where I think Lando confronts him, he decks him, like punches him in the face.
Oh, right. I think that it was because Lando's had a hard time in the book so far.
Yeah.
And he's frequently, and not just in this book, but just in general, Lando's constantly getting into stuff because of Han, and he's kind of also like frustrating. It's frustrating that Han keeps getting him into situations, then it's not worth it for him, and he's like, come on, Han, come on. Like, it's like when he keeps falling for it, he's like, I shouldn't be falling for this anymore, but I still do it because Han's so convincing for me. So I can understand that the Lando gets frustrated, which is also makes sense that they have the kind of contentious relationship that they do in Empire. This doesn't just set up Han in A New Hope. This book excellently sets up Lando in Empire.
Yeah, and it reminds me of, growing up with all the American action movies back in the 80s as a kid. You have these scenes where two buddies, they have to like sort their differences and like just fight each other a little bit. And only after they figure out like, oh, okay, stop for a second. Let's cool off here. Our hormone levels are down. What's going on here? Let's figure this out. It's in a way, it's almost whimsical. It's like two bros have to like duke it out and have a physical release in order to resume their friendship. So next, what happens, their financial woes are mounting. Han and Chewie take a spy smuggling job from Jabba the Hutt, as suspect as it may be, and en route throughout the Kessel Run, they run into an Imperial patrol, and they're forced to abandon their cargo in deep space. When they circle back to retrieve it, big surprise. The merchandise is not there anymore. The friends discover it's completely gone. Now, the smuggler tries to talk his way out of it with Jabba. It's obviously unsuccessful. The Hutt will not hear any of it. He is pissed. He's livid. More than that, he's under the influence. And that's not a good way to talk to a Hutt. I mean, it's ideally never a good way to talk to a Hutt. Avoid them.
Yep.
But he's under the influence. And he goes off on Han. He's like, I demand a Han compensation, right? He's like, he's livid. And yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say I particularly like this because again we've talked a lot about the setup for the movie is we've seen Han have a really good relationship with Jabba in book 2. And so we had to have him on the ropes with Jabba. And at the same time, Jabba mentions in the movie something about dropping your merchandise at the site of a Star Destroyer. And we needed to see that here. And so I appreciated that, Crispin is doing something that some other authors, I think one of these books was dedicated to Kevin Anderson. And Kevin is a master at saying, all right, there's this line in the movie. Let's perfectly encapsulate that line in this scene. And so she went through and she said, all right, this is Han's backstory, the stuff we know that happens in the movie. Let's portray that, but also make sure that it makes sense given the story that I'm telling. And so him having to go on the smuggling run for Jabba, dropping the merchandise, coming back, it'd be gone, having to explain it to Jabba, him explaining it to Jabba and trying to be get an extension, being like, well, let me just get it within this time frame or that stuff. Perfectly in line with the character, perfectly in line to set us up for him to be going to the cantina in A New Hope.
Damn it, John, I have to skip the first of my questions. You read right. I love this. That's exactly the question that I had for you. You just launch full into it. I love it, man. It's like you're just reading it. It's that thrill, it's that excitement of picking up exactly the same details because, the stuff that is hinted at in the movie, right? It's kind of like, that there is a past between Han and Jabba, especially with that ridiculous scene that was added later on in 1997 of Jabba appearing in episode. Get the heck out of this. That was one of the most egregious scenes there that had no business being there. But it completely kills the excitement and anticipation of seeing the crime lord in Return of the Jedi. But I felt that this particular interaction sets up the future Jabba versus Han antagonism very, very well.
Yes,
but thankfully, guys, I saved myself by writing a couple more questions in regard to that. So we still say we're good here. Oh man, this is just so exciting. So I wanted to talk about the difference between the prequel films and unmasking Darth Vader, right? Giving us his backstory, and versus preserving the mystery in original films where we just knew him as Darth Vader. Who do you think did it better, filling in the gaps and giving us the missing piece of the puzzle, so to speak? A.C. Crispin or the way that we see Darth Vader portrayed in the prequels?
That's a bit difficult because the distance from where the character starts to where they ends is so much more in the prequels. Whereas here, it's there's a distance in character, but it's not that different. Han generally has a lot of the same characteristics. Whereas not only is Vader, do we see him go from a boy to an adolescent to an adult in the prequel trilogy, we also see him go from really pure light side to having darker tendencies to full dark side. And so you see that character progression, which is humongous. I think it works really well in the movies. And especially works well when you add in ancillary material, when you add in the Clone Wars TV show, when you add in the comics and the books. When you think about all those factors, it really makes the prequel trilogy really seem like, man, you see that difference unfold for Anakin. Whereas here, it's a trilogy. You could add in the other Han Solo trilogy. I wouldn't, but you could add that in as some ancillary material, which we'll probably talk about that in a second, I hope. But this trilogy, I think it doesn't have as much to do, so it isn't required as much to change. So, I mean, I put them about equal footing. I think they're both good trilogies. It's just one's different focus.
You argue it very, very well, I think, which is It's awesome. But I have to come at it with my personal preconceived notions and my personal bias, right? And the bias is that for over 15 years, from 80s on up, all the way to 1999, when we got the first movie, obviously George Lucas wrote it. It's his creation, his baby. It's nobody's business to tell him how or what should have played out in the prequels. It's his films, right? I'm not critiquing for the story that we got. But I do have my personal bias, as I'm sure other fans do. And that is, what we see is what we get, and these are the films. And I think the enduring and staying power of the original trilogy, without the silly extra $60 million upgrade, specialized editions, are the strengths of its characters and the mystery therein. Seeing the Vader and that off-screen traumatic past, which we're given plenty of stuff, plenty of reasons of something about the Vader, something in the past, the Clone Wars, but he betrayed the Jedi. He was this rotten guy that everybody put their hopes and aspirations, their dreams on. Not necessarily saying he was the chosen one, but he was a prospect. Obi-Wan loved him, and he entrusted him. He instructed him in the Jedi ways, and he betrayed them. And preserving that mystery and trying to figure out, where is the human, where's the person, where's the soul in that iron mask? What makes him such a powerful, powerful villain? When we unmasked Vader in the prequels, I felt it was a huge, huge detriment to the overall story. Again, guys, this is just my bias. We go back, we demystify the magic. We explain the Force with midichlorians. We give you this young guy where we knew exactly where it's going to end. I was 19 years old. I knew exactly where this trilogy ends. It's him in this lava pit, which we already got our rumors from, knowing that Timothy Zahn's original Han Solo trilogy, not Han Solo, I'm sorry, the Throne trilogy, we knew exactly how it's going to end. And you're just telling me a story of this guy and filling in all the details where before my imagination was working hard to fill it in. And just where I come at it personally, I thought the book did it wonderfully for specifically the reason that you mentioned. There was a little of it. Just a little snippet, just a little added bonus, a little texture, a little color to add to the overall Han archetype. And that's it. Mm-hmm. That's just my take on it. But what were you going to say? You wanted to add a little bit more about the auxiliary material, added information there.
So I guess we can tie in. There's a period in this book where basically the trilogy moves away from Han and the book turns away from Han, focuses on Bria and Lando as they're dealing with Boba Fett. And I really like that. But I thought it was fascinating because they had already had the Brian Daley Han Solo trilogy, which I know some fans have the utmost respect and love for, because it's the first real Star Wars books, really, other than Splinter of the Mind's Eye, that they read, and they absolutely love that original Han Solo trilogy. I did not really care for it. I thought it was just okay, because Han's character, I didn't get much of a character. He felt bland in that trilogy compared to this. And then also just the world building and the descriptions and the writing style didn't feel Star Wars. It felt general science fiction. And maybe it's because he just had the one movie. Brian Daley just had one movie, whereas this comes after not only a trilogy, but you also have all the other novels that had come out. So there was an established style for Star Wars at the time. So maybe that's part of the problem of it, but I wasn't the biggest fan of that. So I like that she incorporates the Brian Daley stuff for those who love the Brian Daley stories, but it's more of like meanwhile, this is what's happening with Han, and the general story of this is following Bria and Lando and Boba Fett, which I thought was just so cool, getting to see them, the three of them having to, Bria and Lando trying to have to figure out a way to get out of Boba Fett's clutches. I thought that was just a really, really cool sequence.
Yeah, to speak a tiny bit more on Brian Daley's trilogy, I have only finished the first book from the trilogy. I sort of started off on the second book, and that's where I kind of went down with my channel. I was oversaturated with Star Wars. I decided to take a break. I never rush through reading books for the sake of reviews. I want to read them at my time, because that's honestly when you get the best book reviews. When you invest your time into reading it, it seeps into your pores, and then you could give your honest opinion. I sort of get exactly what you're saying, where the original book from Daly's trilogy was, first of all, I did not like Splinter of the Mind's Eye at all. At all. Again, it's my personal opinion, guys. If you loved it, for whatever reason, more power to you. It didn't feel like Star Wars. Luke and Leia's characters were unrecognizable even from the A New Hope. It just didn't make any sense. He had to go only by one movie because he's portraying them as young as in that film. So it didn't work on any level for me. But when I was reading the Han Solo book, I did enjoy it. What was the first one called? Paradise Snare?
No, that's this one. That's this first one.
What's the first one? Let's get the name.
Han Solo.
At Star's End?
At Star's End.
At Star's End. That's the first one. Yeah.
Han Solo's Legacy, Revenge, and then the third one's The Lost Legacy.
At Star's End. When I read it, it sort of demands you a little bit to switch gears a tiny bit and not try to imagine him as Han Solo. And you are right. It's a little bit different in style from other Star Wars books. Clearly because we didn't have any Star Wars literature on sequels at that point. Only episode 4 to go by. But I felt it was just a successful, worthy adventure to take on. Maybe not the greatest book in the world, but I enjoyed it.
I would describe the original that original trilogy as this is tie-in fiction of this is just they were trying to try out Star Wars books, and so they gave Brian Daley quite a small area of what he could talk about, but within that area he could take the story where he wanted it. Whereas this trilogy, this is more of an epic. It is, you get to have characters from the first book show up in the second, show up in the third. You're getting to see it, so it is a true trilogy. This is 3 books that published around the same time by the same author, but it doesn't feel like a trilogy. Whereas the Crispin stuff, it is a trilogy. It is complete. There's character development, which is the biggest difference between them, and so it's and maybe just writing style. Naturally, some people will go towards the Daily writing style anyway. But then again, I don't feel like I didn't love the L. Neil Smith Lando books for the exact same reason that they didn't have that character development. The writing style was really weird, and it was a different brand of sci-fi than Star Wars has a very specific brand of sci-fi. It's not really hard science fiction, and it's not the classic Arthur C. Clarke science fiction. It's space fantasy, but it's a brand of space fantasy.
Exactly.
And that's why it's like some writers just naturally don't fit for Star Wars. And some writers really do fit. And when you get those writers, you latch onto them. I'm thinking ones like Aaron Alston, Mike Stackpole, Troy Denning. When they got those authors, it was like, okay,
James Luceno,
James Luceno, yes. Yeah. Those authors really understand the Star Wars brand. And just to me, Daley and Neil Smith didn't as much. And I think Crispin did. And she also did for Star Trek. She wrote a bunch of Star Trek novels, and her Star Trek novels also work. So she, I think, really gets how to do media tie-in fiction.
Yeah. Before we move on, I'll add a little tiny bit there and say that the Brian Daley's books are like a free pre-order side mission. We're not talking about Star Wars Outlaws because we don't talk about Jabba Hutt and paywall DLC here. And the AC Crispins feel like full-on DLC. That's the comparison I would make.
Okay. I could see that. I could see that comparison.
Next question is in regards to the Hutt versus Jabba. Is there a scenario in your mind where the Hutt would give Han's lost merchandise and give up on that and say, "I excuse you, kid. You're all right"? Like, what would it take for Jabba's wounded ego to say, like, it's okay?
Nothing. The Hutts are like the Lannisters in Game of Thrones. They always repay their debts. They also make up their debts in some way. You do not cross a Hutt. So yeah, there's I cannot conceive of a way that job, but like maybe if Han took over something, but Han would have to pay it back. That's the no matter what happens, Han has to pay it back in some way, whether it's through his life, which is what happens basically in the movies, or by giving Jabba something of comparable wealth. That is the only way for Han to repay his debt. Because he will not just wipe the slate clean. That is not Jabba's personality. So yeah, I don't see any way of that happening.
Yeah, as we see in the movie, he basically gave Jabba the taste of his own medicine. But I'm not going to exactly argue for it. But when I was reading it, I don't know why I had this feeling, but something about their good relationship felt very comfortable and homey to me. I'm like, yes, Han, he sold it up. Don't mess it up. You got it good. That's the lifestyle you chosen. You want to be a smuggler? That's your main guy. He got your back. Don't mess this thing up. This is your best opportunity. And when this thing happened, when he dropped the merchandise, inside me, I'm like, dude, what are you doing? Swallow your ego, prostrate yourself, just drop on your knees and ask Jabba, like, what else can I do? Can I take another mission? Maybe it's like a bitchy way out. I don't know. But for some reason, I wanted for their particular relationship to resume. Like, please, can we focus on business here? Can we have a compromise?
Well, I like it. I like it in the movies when in that scene that you don't particularly like in A New Hope, where Han is talking with Jabba, and Jabba even says, "Han, my boy," and Jabba's like, come on. And Jabba feels like he has this personal connection. It's like, I love you, man. If you don't pay up, I'm gonna murder you. But I love you, man. You're just it's the mafia. It's not personal. It's just business. Like Jabba is so entertained by Han. Jabba thinks that Han is like so cool to be around.
A sweetheart of his, yeah.
Yeah. But Jabba's gonna get his money. Jabba's gonna get back what's his, and so that's why it's like it doesn't matter how nice or how much Han would beg or how much a connection that they have to anyone. If anyone wrongs Jabba or loses Jabba his money, they're going to find a way to pay. They're gonna have to pay it back in some way.
Yeah. The eyesore original CGI that they had to go back and fix, fortunately for that particular scene. The reason I didn't like it, aside from just ruining the entire pacing of the character, which we're supposed to see only in episode 6, was Han almost brushes him off as a chump. Like, okay, I want to show you want to show that Han is still very confident in his particular position. He has some trading chips, he could negotiating space, but at the same time, I was like, dude, that's Jabba. First of all, the scale was all off. He looks like a little slivering like slug just going after him. He looks very large in scale. He dominates the entire frame in every shot in Return of the Jedi. He's a very imposing figure. Right. Here, he's like, Han, my boy. And Han is like, don't talk to him. And don't send your goons after him. We're like, what the hell? Are you serious? This guy's dangerous.
See, I'll provide the counter argument that I really like that because it shows Han's cockiness. It shows Han will try to bullcrap his way out of any situation. Han has this, or it doesn't work for Han every time, but yeah. Han thinks he has the suaveness that Lando has. Lando, no matter who he's fighting against, Darth Vader, he will come off as suave and put together. And even against Darth Vader, he even loses that a little bit. But like Han will not lose that suaveness. And he was just trying not to with Jabba. So even though Han's probably scared to death of Greedo and the other guys killing him, he has to pretend that he's not to try to show that confidence to Jabba that he can get the money back.
John, I freaking love, when I was a kid, I loved the scene of Bespin where Lando comes to pick up Han and Leia as they're looking at like broken C-3PO. And I loved in the special editions when they added those extra windows and scenes and like showed you more rendered panoramic scene of Bespin. But I love Han's face when Lando comes to pick up Leia and he gives a compliment, he kisses her hand. I'm like, and Leia is staring back at Han and Han is doing this and her face is saying, Han, bless your soul. It's like, you're not on the same level as this guy. It's like,
Right.
you're cute. I still love you, but I'm still gonna play hard to get a little bit. And as a kid, I loved Billy D. Williams with every pore of my like body. Like, oh, he's just so elegant. Strolls in. I mean, how ridiculous is that? He's like rocking a cape. His shirt is half open. He's like, remember that video? Sexual healing. And it's like, that's what he is on screen. It was just amazing dynamic there. But let's not get too distracted with the sex appeal of Lando. Let's move on here. So Bria's rebel forces and the Red Hand Squadron infiltrate Taprawa. I'm not going to go into too much depth because honestly, I'm rolling off my 10 plus year memories of reading the novel. If I'm missing some key details, feel free to plug in. But anyway, they infiltrate Taprawa and they transmit the stolen Death Star plans to Leia Organa aboard the Tantive 4. And Tharian and her comrades are killed in the raid. A very like tense battle scene. But the plans, however, are successfully transmitted. And it's a first major victory for the Rebel Alliance. And wow, now we realize that Bria is gone. We've talked about her at length. And to be honest with you, as I was preparing this questionnaire for the final one, I completely forgot that she's dead. In my mind, I swear to you, in my mind, for some reason, my memory of it was, I told you, I read so much Star Wars and non-Star Wars books that I mix and merge scenes from different books. I had to go to Wikipedia and remind myself. But for some reason, in my mind, she lived. She's over there, part of the resistance. But anyway, we know that she's gone. And you probably, knowing that you read a lot of literature, you understand the mechanics of storytelling. You probably picked up on this. But was it necessary to kill her off?
I think so because it kind of hardens Han a little bit towards the rebellion, and it also makes him also a little bit bitter, more bitter towards the Empire, and also just makes him more bitter in general. And so he becomes that much more cynical person that we see in A New Hope. And really, it sets him up that he's maybe he should have been less trusting of an old man and a boy who come in and offer him just a crap ton of money just for one trip. Like he should have been more logical. Think, there must be something else going on with these guys. Maybe a little bit more dangerous. And instead, in the movie, he's like, "Nah, I'll do it anyway." And I think that's because he just was not in the right headspace to be doing that. So I think that I think it was the right move to kill her off. And too often in the EU, we had instances of a character dying off screen and then off the page, and then the character in some fashion coming back in a later book, and it would be like, oh no, they actually survived. And this happens in the canon too, in a lot of ways. And I think that it's nice to see that they actually, Crispin and the publishing team committed to Bria's dead. Yeah. We're not even going to try to resurrect her like we have other characters' girlfriends.
Were you emotionally invested in it?
Oh yeah, because it's the same way I was with Solo. I would have loved for Han to get together with Bria, or for Han to end up with Kira. I wanted that, but I also had the logical side of my brain saying he can end up with Bria. So it was I am heartbroken that he's not together with Bria, but I don't feel like throwing my book across the room like with other character deaths. Like the book where Chewie dies in the EU, there was intense reaction from people because they felt it didn't feel like the right move. I think it was, but they felt like it wasn't the right thing to happen. Yeah, you were one of them. However, here it feels like even though you're heartbroken, you're angry about it, you understand it and you're willing to go along with it because you understand he has to end up with someone else. And that's one of the easiness that she has with a prequel, is that, again, she knew where it ends up, and the audience knows that too. So the audience can't get too mad at her for killing off Bria.
Before making my next point, I'm just going to say this. Chewie dying in the New Jedi Order, Vector Prime, I think it happened.
Yep, Vector Prime, first book.
Without a specific living, breathing enemy destroying you, it is the most baller, crazy, larger than life scene I've experienced in the New Jedi Order. My dude is just standing, ripping his chest, shirt, whatever thing he has. He obviously doesn't have one, but he's doing this, and he's like, come on, bro. Come at me. Like, what? An entire moon, an entire, like, celestial body falling on top. Oh, so emotional. So well done. And I knew this is an example of a story written in the committee, proverbially, right? Because they did have a writing group for the New Jedi Order that was signed off by George Lucas with specific, purpose of adding more gravitas to the IP, because fans were complaining that, all the good guys never die. They're never hurt in the story. Right. But when it's so well conceived and it's precise and it's so well executed, like, I never tear up when I watch movies or read the books, but man, I was like, I wanted to be there for Chewie. I wanted to save him personally. But my point go ahead.
Okay, go. I was just gonna say real quick, this isn't a New Jedi Order discussion, but I will add that if I had been in the committee, I would have totally said, all right, for this book specifically, this has to be an established author. Ergo, Michael Stackpole. It should have been Michael delivering that. Michael had the connection with the fans. He had the clout. He had the respect. If Michael Stackpole had killed off Chewie, he would not have gotten the same reaction as R.A. Salvatore did. And it was R.A. Salvatore's first Star Wars novel. It was the first novel from this new publisher, Del Rey, that had not done the books really in the expanded universe.
A lot of question marks.
There were a lot of question marks behind it. People felt betrayed. So I just feel like in hindsight, Stackpole should have done the book, and R.A. Salvatore should have done the follow-up books. But that's not the way they went.
I mean, I've read them so long ago. I can't make a judgment there. But going back to our story, what I wanted to say in regards to Bria's death was that I'm okay with major characters surviving their past due time if it's well done and they're retooled for a different story in a meaningful way. To be honest with you, when I was watching Rogue One, I wasn't emotionally invested because the story that turned out to be that nobody wanted to see but everybody loved with Rogue One. And I was 50 and 50 on, like, is he going to kill off everybody or maybe some will survive? It could go either way. I wasn't completely signing off on every character's death. And honestly, the way they were dying in the movie, my biggest gripe with the story is its emotional gravitas, which it completely lacks. It's an excellent script on paper, an excellent execution frame by frame, but there's zero emotional investment. Like, when they're dying at all, it's like, check, this dude dies, this guy, the pilot dies, this guy dies. The only one you care for is the KSO, the robot. And I felt like, hold on a second, is it necessary to kill him off? Couldn't Jyn Erso win and be saved somehow along with Andor somewhere? They're like, perhaps in episode 4, there's somewhere they're chilling in the, Yavin 4 temple somewhere over here, and they're celebrating along with the Ewoks. We don't necessarily need to see them. It's not required to kill them off. That's how I felt with Bria. Like, okay, she's dead. Okay. It's powerful. It's great. It's a great attribute to the book. It's not a detriment. And the last one I had here in this moment, let me just quickly capture myself here. Oh, yeah, that's exactly what I was saying. We're basically already talking about it. Is there an effective way to shoehorn a character back into the story? Whether jumping from video game into movie or vice versa. Do you feel there's a way to do that?
Here with Bria, I could easily have seen another pre-episode 4 novel feature Bria in a council meeting of some sort or something like that. And it would have been a nice way to feature her. I feel like it would have felt cheaper if she had survived. And that's actually quite kind of reason I love Kira, and Emilia Clarke is one of my favorite actresses of all time, but I wish that we had gotten an ending for Kira pre-episode 4, because now I feel conflicted. I'm like, Kira's still alive. He could end up with her, but he's supposed to end up with Leia. But like, how does all that work? If she had an ending previously, it would have been so much cleaner and easier for me to be like, all right, well, Han has to be with Leia now. Yeah. So I'm happy that that Bria's character dies, because it makes it easier for the audience.
Yeah, the opposite point of this is, I'll say this: I completely withdrew from the new Marvel comic run because I was collecting them, physical edition, issue by issue. I still have my first box of first 2-3 years of the Marvel run of comic books, like special covers and everything. What completely turned me off was when you see Luke in the vicinity of Vader for 25,000 times before their meeting in Empire Strikes Back. It's like completely watered down. Like, I don't care for it anymore.
That's how I felt with
It's like,
Dooku meeting Anakin a bunch of times in the Clone Wars, and I'm like, okay, and same with Obi-Wan with Grievous. I'm like, okay, you guys have met too many times.
Yeah. Moving on, Han is back on Tatooine. He tries to get a face-to-face meeting with a Jabba the Hutt, but he's turned down. He's frustrated, and now his friction with other bounty hunters intensifies. He's in the side spot. He briefly runs into, speaking about shoehorning, Dash Rendar. We'll talk about him. And while looking for another opportunity to score a big victory in a, chance game of Sabacc. And of all the characters, it's Boba Fett who delivers the news of Bria's tragic death to Han. And not only that, he also mentions, like, hey, by the way, this little Greedo schmuck, this green dude, he is this Rodian. He's after you. He's trying to kill you, Han. Watch out. But heartbroken, Han sends his whole recording to Bria's father, passing on his condolences. So, wait, hold on a second. Guys, wait. Hold it. Boba Fett? The messenger boy? Really? Honestly? Seriously? Was this curious interaction in line with the original trilogy?
No, but I kind of liked it. I really liked the use of Boba in this book a lot more than the first, the second book. For one thing, I really liked how he's the one that delivers the final blow to Terraneza, killing him. The priest, I thought that was a really funny way to do it. But that was one of those times where subverting expectations worked. I liked that he, the thing about Boba in this trilogy and in some of the other books in the EU is he's portrayed as entirely honorable. It's about he's doing it for the money, and it's not personal, it's just business. And if he signs up for this contract, he's going to try to fulfill it to the best of his abilities. And when he makes the deal with Bria that he will tell her father that she's died, and when she does die, he feels honor bound to complete that contract and that deal, and he feels the best way to do that is by telling Han, and because Han knows who her parents are. And so I was like, that makes total sense based off what we've established with his honor code. So I did like that, even though Han and Boba don't necessarily seem to be on speaking terms in the movie. We don't get that much interaction with Boba Fett in the movie, but I liked it here.
I have two thoughts here, and on my second thought, I'm going to counter-argue a little bit, and feel free to push back if you want. I think this could be a little exciting here. So first, I'm going to say a travesty to some fans' ears, but was absolutely true. Disregarding all the expanded universe material for a second, when you see the original trilogy for many, many years, who is Boba Fett? He's a nobody. He's a background drop. He just stands there with the gun, and then he flies right into the Salar pit. Oh, the costume was cool. See ya. He's a nobody. So it stands to reason that however she chose to write him in this book made sense. Now, the arguments are made, well, hold on, Ben. By this time, there's already expanded universe books. And I felt like it's completely justified to pass on a character from author to author and let them have their own voice and add to the character, as long as it's not egregiously different from previous versions, which I think she did pretty well here. And now here's the counter argument. You stated that, if I remember right, you said that he's an honorable man, right? Because also in the Boba Fett book would say, I will rule with honor. This was also a scene which completely put me off of the Boba Fett a character or the show, because in my view he's not honorable. He's a cold and calculating killing machine. Because remember, I don't know if you checked out, and it's not my ego boost way of kind of like, well, have you read this book? But I'm just bringing it as an example. When you read some of the Cam Kennedy's comic books with him, The way that he recites, like when he grabs a bounty and he's about to blast the dude into smithereens, see, like he narrates something to him, he recites something, always to show that I come up on top. Every single deal is gonna go my way. It's like, so in my view, it has little to do with honor and more like, no, I'm just smarter than you are. I'm more efficient than you are, and it's gonna go exactly how I say it's gonna go. And in this case with Han, he's standing there. He's like, am I gonna kill this dork or not? Is Jabba gonna offer me something for this guy? At this point, he's nobody. I don't need to care for him. You know what? I'm just gonna pass on the word, see his reaction, study him a little bit.
Yeah. I see. I've always, even pre Book of Boba Fett, I just always viewed, Boba as that honorable character because of the way the EU portrayed him. And then once we had the Book of Boba Fett, I was like, all right, this seems in line with his character for me. So it just naturally. But I see what you're saying with the other books maybe portraying him as being more calculated and being more focused on his win at all costs perspective.
Yeah, and I think what also supports my viewpoint later on, I don't know how far into the future new like series have you read, but I'm not even sure where this particular bookmark is at. I want to say it's at the end of the Legacy series where the other Mandos step in, and right there they call him Bobika, little Boba. It's like Bobika, step your game up, because the Mandalorians we see in the EU books, they're not these like filtered out, neutered, family friendly versions we see in the show. Over there, each Mandalorian carries his weight. Boba Fett is not above them. In fact, many of them are his senior and they're seasoned, battle-hardened veterans, right? And I forgot exactly which one was it. It's not Kal Skirata because he's much earlier. It's other Mandalorians who later on, they tell him, Bobika, step your game up. We need a leader of the Mandalore. You got the chops. Do your thing. Assume responsibility. And it's then when he starts reevaluating his life, the whole tragedy that happens with his daughter, and later on, him facing his past in a way, reconnecting with his granddaughter, right? That's when he is like, you know what? Enough of being this selfish killer machine, always like checking out what my bank balance is and what's my next target. I need to become something more now. I need to do something for my people and give back.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can see that.
Yeah.
I do remember that part in the Legacy books. I do remember that.
I think that's towards the Legacy, towards the Invincible, when the whole thing with Jaina and Jason. Let's not delve too much into it. It might spoil a lot more. But yeah, we mentioned little shoehorning, and we mentioned little guy who is one of the most beloved side characters in the EU, Dash Rendar, right? He's instrumental in the attack on the second Death Star, right? But from the shadows of the Empire. But what's his purpose in this book?
It was more, I think it was just, eat cool Easter egg. Has a connection to Han. But it was kind of like throwing in Thraken Sal Solo in the first book. You didn't need Thraken Sal Solo in the book, but it was a cool way to be like, hey, you've also read the Corellian trilogy. Here's a reward for that. You're getting that character show up real quick here. That's how it felt to me, is that this is the reward for reading this whole trilogy, is you also see Dash Rendar from Shadows of the Empire.
Unfortunately, I never had a Nintendo 64 as a teenager. I opted out for PS1, and I was always like drooling over magazines, like looking at the screen. She's like, oh my God, man, this game is so awesome. Who is this guy? And I remember later on at the Force Net, the site that had like posted all the Expanded Universe book reviews, somewhere there in their blog or whatever, I saw the model photo of the actual actor who portrays him. Yeah. And I was just like so infatuated with the character design, like this silly, over the top 90s, like cheesy, beautiful character design. I'm like, and he's like just so bro looking. I'm like, who is this guy, man? Who's this dude? And when you see him in the novel, that kind of like almost bump shoulders, like, oh yeah, man, yeah.
He's barely in the novel,
right? He's barely there. It's like a small little thing, but it was a little touch, but it stands again to reason that it was their way of connecting the dots and saying, here is your reward for reading Shadows of the Empire and other Star Wars books. John, quickly touch on Han's heartfelt message, his holo recording to Bria's father.
it leaves a little bit of hope in Han, despite the bad place he's in. It's that, when he records that message to her father, it's he's especially doing it because her father was the one person who was, nice to Han and her in their family. But he's showing that, how much she meant to him. That, we were talking about earlier, he never got over her. And
Yeah.
so this is a nice way of honoring her. And then also it's a nice way of showing that he still has that doing the right thing in him. So he may be moving on the cynical. He's becoming more cynical as each book happens, but this is reminding you he has that hope. He has that little bit of hope to him. Don't forget that goodness that's in him.
Yeah, that's exactly how I would say it. Like her passing and having that valuable time with a person that you love. And
Mhm.
like I agree that he never truly got over her. It
Yeah.
is a little bit of that friction when he talks to her. He's like, hey, lady, I don't listen to myself. He's like, I've been around. I'm more experienced than you are. This 19-year-old royalty princess is running around pulling my friend a rug over here. Like, come on. It's her passing anchors the good in him, and there's this
Mhm.
always this inner conflict. It's like, do I say just screw it, get my money, get my reward, and leave these guys to their fate, or do I come back and help this young kid save his butt, right, and come gloriously and save the day for everybody? Again,
Mhm.
it's understanding characters' inner workings so well, which once again I want to reiterate the point that we're missing in current media, not just Star Wars, so much the soulfulness to these characters. What are they going through? What are they feeling? How can we relate? I reiterate the point. Star Wars is not about blaster shots. It's not about lasers. It's not about cool triangular pizza looking ships and scale. It's all nice. It's visuals. How many people go back and rewatch, I don't know, the Sky Captain of Tomorrow, whatever, the first full CGI movie that was made during Attack of the Clones came concurrently. Nobody remembers that movie. It was amazing visuals, amazing, tremendous. It's the stories and characters that we come back to. And I felt like when San is giving that scene, he's burying his lost love, but also he's saving the goodness inside of him.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, so we end with Han, obviously in Mos Eisley Cantina. He's checking out on the good old, well, not checking out. He's meeting good old Ben Kenobi. He's bargaining to passage to Alderaan. And no questions asked. Did reuniting with Luke and Kenobi hit the sweet spot, or you feel that you prefer familiar characters to be left out of your story?
Oh, I'm happy when familiar characters are present. It is a bit weird when your story, like when this is a prequel trilogy and it
Mhm.
goes right up to the minute, right before A New Hope. That just felt a little weird. Like it also felt weird in Rogue One when this happened, but at least Rogue One, the entire story was taking place right before anyway. So at least in Rogue One, it kind of made more sense to me. So it felt a little icky that it went right up to the thing. However, it was also cool because I was like, oh, that's what he was like. You want to see this, you want to read the scene of Han beforehand. You can literally just read the epilogue, the last chapter of this book. So it's like a give and take of I like it and I don't like it at the same time.
Yeah, it's like for me it was here's the last page. I'm watching the movie now. It's like
Yes, yes, this would be
it's
it
so
would be excellent
seamless.
to finish this book and go straight into the movie. It would be fantastic.
Yeah. Which is the best example of tying two stories together? Like you started mentioning Rogue One and everything. Would you, and you sort of already jumped into it, Rogue One's Tantive Force scene, the solo movie ending, or this particular trilogy? If you had to pick one out of the three, which one would it be?
I would pick the Rogue One ending because it feels very earned.
Mm,
But I would say that this ending and the solo ending doesn't have quite the same effect because it's more about the story. Like when he says, "Oh, I know that I've heard about this job on Tatooine," you're like, "Oh, he's gonna go see Jabba," and you're like, "That could be the next solo movie that we see." Whereas here, the lead up's literally into A New Hope. Like we've
more
seen the Jabba
complete.
story. It's more complete. So this, in that sense, works a little bit better as a tie-in to the movie. But I think of all three, Rogue One is the best.
I would have agreed with you for the one exception. Um, I came out of the theaters with Rogue One with a feeling that still is pretty much unaltered to this day. On one hand, it was a missed opportunity in terms of subtext and feeling and the emotional component. Maybe one scene that I truly loved was Jyn is seeing her father's holo recording.
Mm-hmm.
That really struck me a lot. In a trailer, when she says rebellions are built on hope, I was so looking forward to it, and the scene just dropped flat in the movie for me when she says that line, and that's how the entire movie felt. But I was completely enthralled with the spectacle and the action of it. I said to myself, literally, like all my friends were leaving the theater, I said, Ben, dude, shut the hell up and eat this cake up, bro. It is amazing. Okay, didn't get the emotional side of it. My friends and my brother was like, what are you talking about, Ben? Everything was in this movie. It's my friend's favorite Star Wars movies, even above the original trilogy. It's amazing. And I said, Ben, just stop. You cynical, bitchy super fan. Come on, bro. It's amazing. And I loved it. But two things I can't help but pick on. Tarkin and Leia.
Yeah, the CGI was a
it
little
was
rough.
stunning to see Tarkin all up to the point where he turns around.
Yeah.
If you left him standing there behind, same with Leia. If you leave, right, standing there, because we know who she is. We are there for the ride. We're cheering for her. Like, oh my God. If you leave that little mystery there, maybe like little silent, little like hairpiece just falling, and that's it, it would have been gold. The music is there. The amazing, if I may, orgasmic Darth Vader hallway scene, because everybody's lightsaber went like, bzz, like oh my God, like everybody. I don't care how you feel about this movie. When you saw that scene, I'm checking like my friends. I was saying it in another podcast I was recording. It's like, I'm looking at an entire row of my brother and my friends. They felt physically repulsed when they saw Vader. It's like, oh, what is
right?
Holy, it's like God, the Jesus Lord of Star Wars descended upon Earth and was put into a Star Wars movie scene. It was amazing. And if it would have been an extra points if Leia's emotional beat was there too.
Yeah.
That's the way it played out for me. John, a couple of last questions to tie it all up. It was quite a ride. I hope we can jump on maybe some old, newer Star Wars books, whatever you want to discuss, maybe on your podcast, whatever, however you decide to do it. I love talking to you, man. It's interesting how a lot of our thoughts align on the book, but also we have different interpretations. The way that you describe Boba Fett makes me, and Bria as well, I'm like, I never looked at it this way. That's awesome. Anyway, last couple of questions. As a whole A.C. Crispin's young Han Solo trilogy overall, what do you think was her original intent, and what did she accomplish the best in this trilogy?
The answer to both questions is showing Han's journey to get to the original trilogy. And I think she absolutely nailed that completely. Some little hiccups, I think, in book 2, but otherwise, I think she nailed it. Getting his character from the beginning to the end of the trilogy, getting him, setting up that character that we know in A New Hope. I think she was golden.
Yeah. I'm going to add to that and say beyond the obvious that both you and I loved Han's progression. Another aspect of Star Wars, which I think all of us admire, is going on an adventure. I am going on an adventure. It's seeing new species that are interesting, that are different, that are exciting, different planets. For me, the experience of learning English and reading Star Wars was like this. I started with translating my favorite lyrics, like Metallica, Megadeth, and just moved on to books. Being able to envision a scene, a location, the spice refining factory without full details, because you can't sit with a physical translator, right? We're talking about 15 years ago, without electronic ones, without Wikipedia, whatever, and with a novel, and constantly reference back words that you don't know. So without the benefit of knowing the full details of a scene, what you do as an English second language speaker, you start completing the mental image yourself. And in a way, you start owing the books the way that they could never be intended to be like absorbed.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I really loved the scenery. I really loved the sense of adventure. I really love this swampy, like Nar Shaddaa, with the neighborhoods that feel like Corellia. I always try to imagine Corellia. Who would have thought later on I would read the Corellian trilogy and get a full scope of what the planet looks like? But here you're like, oh my god! And these other huts are running around. They're so believable, and they have as much of weight as Jabba the Hutt himself. That to me was the jewel upon the crown. Going on that different visual adventure. She was excellent at that. Very few authors managed to just capture like this. Oftentimes we revisit the planets that when I was like, okay, how many times can we go to, Obi-Wan Kenobi's house? It's right. Covered by sand now. Can we leave it in the past, please? Next question is, what are the key points for you in the book or the film trilogy? Like the complete highlight of the trilogy.
Oh, the highlights. First, in the first book, Han and Bria, their meeting scenes, their connections, and Han convincing her to leave with him, and then her leaving the note for him, and him deciding, well, I'm going to join the Empire. That scene was just those scenes really got to me. I would say that in the second book, Han hearing Darth Vader is like a all-time scene in the book, and then for the third book, it's the Brea and Lando stuff really was a highlight for me, and then the epilogue of Han getting ready for A New Hope. That even though I feel conflicted on it, I thought it stuck with me, and so those are the highlights for me.
I had a couple of them, and mostly they have to do with, like, again, my visual memory, like trying to picture those scenes. And one of them was, oddly enough, when Han and Bria, they break into Terrance's vault.
Yeah.
I was trying to picture that. I was like, how cool is that? It's like space gangster, like drug dealer dude. He probably has a lot of like cool art. It's almost like that scene in Mass Effect Trilogy. I don't know if you played those games where you in one of the missions, you break into this intergalactic gangster's vault, and there's also a lot of different pieces representing different aspects of this universe. That's what I was imagining there. The other one was when obviously the last one, when Han meets the Obi-Wan Kenobi and Luke. It was also a very nice ending and like seamless transition into the movies. But the other one that I had was, I'm trying to remember what was it? I was just gonna say it. It was the vault. Oh yeah. When Han meets Murg for the first time.
Yeah.
Because you already have the promise of it on the cover, and until you read the book, you don't even know if he's like main, side, or whatever that is. I'm like, who's that? That looks kind of cool. And you start reading, and he's a big giant cat, and I love cats.
Yeah.
And he's this bipedal dude who, for the time being, is equally as cool as Chewie. Until that point where Chewie obviously gets the seat at the Falcon. I loved him. I was like, more. I want more cats in Star Wars. Please give me. Next question I have is, do you think it's possible that we will ever see Bria Theron incorporated into modern canon?
Probably not. I mean, we already got Kira. That's as close as you're going to get. So,
yeah. No. Would you want to?
Into the canon? No. Since we've already got Kira.
Because we got Kira, she would take
much
the
of the same thing. Yeah. We don't like there are EU characters that I would really like to see in the canon. Bria's not one of them. I'm happy to leave Bria where she is, even though I loved her. Happy to leave her there.
Who would you bring? Who's your top number one?
I would really like to see Talon Card. I think that's a character that we could easily bring in. I think you could. Did you have to do it? His later story would be different, but bringing in Corran Horn, I think could be possible. I think that some of the characters from the Old Republic could be brought in a certain way. But so those are like those ones. The one that everyone says and talks about, Mara Jade, I don't know. I don't think it's going to work now. She's too big. She's too big, and it would be too big of a difference. At least with Thrawn, the character's the same. The types of things he's doing and dealing with are the same. Yeah. So it made sense to bring him in. But Talon Card and Corran Horn, I would like to see them brought in.
Yeah, I think with Thrawn, you may change his origin and play around with him, but he's the sort of element in the story that you could retool easily.
Yeah.
Oh, well, just position him in this timeline, and he's gonna come in later and try to avenge the fallen empire, and we can kill him off of this. Yeah, it'll probably upset some of the hardcore fans. I'm not tethered to that. I'm okay with that because I loved X-Men First Class, how it plays around with the ideas that the movie understands well, but wants to put in a new perspective, frame it differently. They could do it with Thrawn, not with Mara Jade. Too much connection to Luke there.
Yeah.
But one character that I would love to bring is from my favorite Star Wars crime syndicate, Black Sun. You know what I'm talking about.
Prince Xizor?
Prince Xizor. My man. My man. Hugo Weaving. Please, no one else. Hugo Weaving, own it. Just come in there and throw Leia. I don't care if it's Leia CGI. He's like, come here, baby. Oh, Luke, I got your sister over here. I got you. It would have been amazing. We're almost at an end here. What's one lesson modern Star Wars authors can learn from A.C. Crispin's approach to storytelling?
In your writing, the goal of a tie-in fiction is to reward fans of the broader area sense, in this case of the movies or even the TV shows. And so you want your writing style to feel like Star Wars. You want it to feel like you are being rewarded for being a fan of this franchise. And so you want your style to when you read it, you say, this is indelibly Star Wars that I'm reading. I'll go back to my previous point. Han Solo Adventures does not have that feeling for me, therefore it did not leave an impact. This trilogy did feel like that and did leave that impact. And so I think that modern authors need to get that you can, experiment, do your own things, but you need to feel like Star Wars when you're writing.
Yeah. I'm going to add one more. Parrot what you said, basically. I agree with everything 100%. But another aspect I would like to say is, it is, when you're working with your own story, you're free to do whatever the heck you want. And if people disagree, see ya. Right. You don't like the modern themes or modern stuff, that's happening in the world, tough luck. That's this author, that's his book, take it or leave it. When you're working within a franchise that is established and is globally known and has 40, almost 50-year-old history, it is, I would say, your obligation, especially in your endeavor to take arguably its most recognizable character, Han Solo, and deconstruct him. It is your obligation not to insert yourself, not put messaging into it, but do every single thing that is in service of the story. I make these kind of like tweets on the X platform that I try to ask some fans hard questions, which some of them find inflammatory. It's like, oh, this BS question, don't ask this anymore. So, hold on a second, I'm coming from a different point. I understand that you may be tired of culture wars, that's fine. But the reason is that I'm asking this question, I want to kind of like test the soil, see where the modern fans are coming from. And there's a lot of this discourse where we need to be represented, we need to be seen in order to associate with a work of fiction. Well, I find it a very dysfunctional way to approach. What, you're not going to read Mark Twain anymore? You're not going to read Jules Verne? You're not going to read, Conan Doyle or James Fenimore Cooper because they're products of their time? Are you serious? That's a very shallow look on art in general. It's not meant to be tailored to your worldview. If you have, like I told you before, you and I, we may look similar. I have my lighting a little bit off. I'm going to make an assumption in a best friendly manner to say that you're a white person, right? I am not, right? I may look white, but I'm not. I'm 92% West Asian and African. I don't need to see myself in Star Wars story to relate to it. If that's your sole reason to go into it, and that's one point that it's make it or break it sort of deal, there's something wrong with you. I honestly believe so. Star Wars is a product, a beautiful product of white America. Look at the guys, look at the men who made it. If you disagree with these guys, if you don't like, if you think some sort of portrayal of Han Solo is sexist, go find something else to enjoy. That's fine. When an author is working within the context of something that people recognize around the world. If I ranted a little bit, guys, please leave all of your comments in the video description. I'll be happy to address them. It's what I adamantly believe. Star Wars is for all of us. If we're sharing in this world, like you and I, we come from 2 different generations, 2 different cultures. Obviously, I have adapted. I've become a child of the American culture as well. But we're able to align on this one guy and see something that we recognize from the films. That's your job. That's what you're supposed to do as author. And if you're honest, and I think one of the authors I want to highlight today that has done very well is, oh my God. Why do I always blank out? Charles Soule is excellent with the High Republic. Oh my God, the Master and Apprentice.
Claudia Gray.
I interviewed Claudia Gray. Why do I forget her name? Self-plug. But yeah, and you know, when I hinted, because when you discuss like getting an author into your podcast, you get a list of things you can't you want to respect the author working for the company. You don't want to push any boundaries. But I did sort of kind of hint at her that, look, and she's a woman author who I love and admire and respect a lot. And when I hinted at the way that the women are portrayed in fiction today versus what she has in her book and what Star Wars did before, I think the way I read into it, I flipped her mind a little bit. And she was like, you know what? I never thought about this. I agree. Women were always strong in Star Wars, and they were well represented and well done. That's what we need to see more. John, it's been a pleasure. It was an epic trilogy. Any last words we're going to say to fans? We're going to part here. If you enjoyed this podcast, please feel free to support John at his channel. All the links will be below. If you disagree with us, please don't come at us. Please state your points. Present them in a reasonable manner. We will respond.
Thanks for having me on. I love being able, on my channel, I generally don't do spoiler reviews, so it's nice to be able to get into spoilers and have more of a full conversation about stuff.
Yeah. John, my last words are not to my fans, whom I greatly, greatly appreciate, and thank you for watching, guys, but to you. It's kind of a hint. I love writing questions and asking them. I love answering them even more.
All right, I'll take the hint. I'll get you on the channel.
I hope it gets the message across. I love answering questions. John, it was absolutely a blast talking to you. Guys, thanks a lot for watching. We'll see you all later.